Joining us now is Jamelle Bouie, New York Times opinion columnist and co-host of the Unclear and Present Danger podcast, and Tim Miller, writer-at-large at The Bulwark. Thank you guys both for being here. Tim, can you help me understand what was going on in that room last night? What almost sounded like a laugh track at points for some of the most disingenuous, hateful, malicious commentary I've heard in a while.
Well, there are two things that were happening. One is the room was stacked with Republicans. I mean, there were local New Hampshire Republicans, but I saw in the audience a guy I know that's a Republican fundraiser, professional Republican fundraiser, Chris Applegate. He doesn't live in New Hampshire. Trump acknowledged Woody, who it seems it was Woody Johnson, the New York Jets owner, in the crowd who was there. So a lot of Trump people were stacked in the audience. So that's part of it. I'm not sure that I think that was a really poor production choice. But I think at a broader level, what we've learned here and the difference between the McCain video that you showed at the top and the Trump era is not that humans, that Republican-based voters, but all humans don't have darker angels, don't have darker impulses, but that Donald Trump has let people feel like it's okay to let those out, to let their freak flag fly. That's what they like about him. And what they like about Donald Trump, despite the fact that he's lost a bunch since then, is that he won in 2016 while allowing them to be their worst selves, right? They look back at that John McCain video, not with nostalgia, but say that's a loser. Like that's a loser's mentality. And so because Trump happened to win in a very narrow election, losing the popular vote, that affirmed this idea that they can do that politics is fun. It's a big, a big game of Apprentice. It's a Catskill stand-up act, and they can enjoy it when he demeans women, when he, says that a black Capitol police officer is a thug, et cetera. And I think that's been really probably the most disappointing thing to learn about the entire Trump era, that's what Republican voters want, actually.
To that end, Jamelle, I'm just really struck at, obviously the cruelty is somehow cathartic or enjoyable for crowds like this, for voters like this. But they are given moments to fix themselves, to act like adults, to re-enter this society. Those inflection points are when Trump is revealed to be actually a loser and maybe a criminal and a sexual predator. And yet none of it seems to stick. When I watched that event go ahead.
I think none of it seems to stick, though, in part because there's this cycle happening where other Republican politicians seem to have resigned themselves to the idea that nothing is going to change or nothing can be changed about the relationship of Republican voters to Trump. And so that fatalism and that fear as well, the fear that actually stepping up to Trump might jeopardize their own prospects, means that when these opportunities arise to maybe break the spell a little bit, other Republicans don't take them. Other Republican leaders don't take them. And the thing that makes a lot of sense to me intuitively, if in a community of people, other people you trust aren't sounding the alarms about someone else, it's not going to be the case that you yourself are going to sound those alarms either. People tend to react to smoke. They tend to assume there's fire. But if no one around you in the community, the leaders that you trust, act as if there's smoke, then why would you? And I think that's more or less the dynamic that keeps happening with Trump, his voters, and other Republican leaders.
Tim, sorry. Do you agree with that conceit that this is effectively party-wide failure on display? This is the fact that nobody is the adult in the room, that no one's saying, shh, all of you, and more importantly, be quiet, Mr. Former President. Is this an indictment of the GOP?
It is. I agree with that in part, I guess, most of the way. Here's one piece of evidence in favor of what Jamelle's arguing, right, is that if you look after the election, there really was a moment where maybe not a huge majority, but a slight majority of the party really was ready to move on from Trump after the 2022 election, right, because they had just lived the 2020 election, now the insurrection, then the midterms go poorly. And a lot of Republicans were speaking out, not about Trump being a bad person, really, but that he was bad for the party. And in the Bulwark, in the focus groups with MAGA voters we do, that was coming out. The problem was that feeling dissipates. That feeling was there for a week. You can't just say it one time. You have to keep banging it into the heads of your own supporters. And over time, they started to remember the things that they liked about Trump, and they weren't being reminded by Republican leaders. And this has been a failure by Republican leaders and conservative media figures for not continuing to speak out. I agree with that. I do think the one area where I slightly disagree, though, is because of what I said earlier. Trump's win in 2016 created this mindset in these voters, is that we can be cruel, we can focus only on lib owning, and we can get what our, have our cake and eat it too and win. And once they had that belief, once nobody stood up to him back then, once he won anyway, the water was kind of contaminated, right? And so now even when people do speak out, there's a lot of folks who are like, yeah, you're saying there's smoke, but whatever. People said there was smoke in 2016 and he won anyway. And so I think that in a lot of ways, there's a certain segment of the party that at this point is really contaminated to such a degree that it's going to take many years, not just a small little window of leadership to push people off of him.
That's dark. I mean, that's a dark prognosis.